Welcome to Withdraw Consent. I'm Jack. Today we have Gerron back with us. Howdy. And he's
Howdy.
got he's got a new idea for us. Let's hear it. I'm real excited to hear this one.
All right, so I was thinking the other day, and I came up with this really controversial idea about anti-Semitism and where it stems from. And I'm gonna pose the idea that Jesus was, in a sense, the first anti-Semite, given the the definition of anti-Semitism, which it differs from depending on who you ask, but it can either mean like you're against Jews as a whole, you're against Hebrews, you're against the state of Israel. It depends because, like Ben Shapiro, for instance, he likes to say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, which, if you ask someone else, like the word Semitic in itself means from descendants of Shem, which would include everyone, like Arabs, I think Ethiopians, like a lot of Babylonians, lots of different groups. But specifically in 1879, the term anti-Semitism was coined, and it generally just referred to people against Talmudic Judaism, in a sense. So where do I get this crazy idea that Jesus himself was anti-Semitic? Well, if you read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's all throughout the entire thing. Because what does he do? He comes. The Jews already have control somewhat over their homeland, so the Romans come in. And the reason why the Romans are there in the first place, it wasn't because they came in and brutally conquered them. In a lot of people consider the books of Maccabees, especially, or specifically in this case, First Maccabees, it was historically part of the biblical canon until a lot of it got taken out during the Protestant Reformation, and also the Hebrew Masoretic text, which was written in a form of Hebrew about 1,000 years after Christ. They took it out because a lot of it was because they didn't want people to know certain things. But basically, there's this guy, Judas Maccabees. He's this Jewish revolutionary who rises up against one of Alexander the Great's generals, or the descendants, the Seleucids. And these guys are brutal. They rise up against the Seleucids, and basically the whole book is just about a constant war, a revolution getting fought. Judas Maccabees dies. His brother Jonathan takes over, and this guy starts making deals and alliances with all these other people and countries, two of which are the Roman Republic and Sparta, which I find fascinating. But so fast forward about 100 years later, the Romans use that treaty as an excuse to come in and basically install their own king, King Herod the Great, on the throne. And from that point, the Pharisees and the different Jewish factions, they support Herod. Essentially, they allow for the Romans in there, or excuse me, they don't really support Herod and his dynasty, but the Romans allow them to. They govern it, and they allow them to basically run their own country so long as they don't get out of hand. Now when Jesus shows up, this is like about 40 years after this conquest, or when they come in. What does Jesus do? They're expecting their Messiah being basically a conqueror, someone like King David, or someone like another one of Judas Maccabees' brothers, Simon, who basically created an earthly kingdom that was very prosperous, safe, secure, everything like that. When Jesus comes and as the Messiah, they see that as basically treason. They see it as blasphemy. They see them as taking over something that like they'd worked so hard to build. So the Pharisees started when basically because they wanted the Messiah to come. They just wanted their Messiah to come, and they're still waiting for their Messiah. So what makes Jesus anti-Semitic in this case? For this, I'm gonna say that Jewish refers, or that anti-Semitism refers to like the against the Pharisees, because they were the dominating Jewish sect. So if you go to reference 1, we have there were a bunch of Jewish factions. So there were the Pharisees, which according to this site, it's the Jewish virtual library, so it's pro-Jewish. The most important of the three were the Pharisees because they're the spiritual fathers of modern Judaism. Their main distinguishing characteristic was a belief in an oral law that God gave to Moses at Sinai, along with the Torah. The Torah, or written law, was akin to the U.S. Constitution in the sense it was a set down series of laws open to interpretation. The Pharisees believed that God gave Moses the knowledge of what these laws meant and how they should be applied. This oral tradition was codified and written down roughly 3 centuries later in what was known as the Talmud. And we're going to get into why, why that happened a little bit later. The Sadducees, so I'm not going to read these because they're not so important for this specific talk, but the Sadducees basically only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, and didn't believe in resurrection, whereas the Pharisees did.
So the Sadducees didn't believe in the Talmud?
No, the Sadducees weren't around by the time the Talmud was written.
Wait, but the Talmud was written 500 years before Jesus.
It was written like 500 years after Jesus.
Oh.
It had parts of it that were being written, but it didn't have like come to be its own thing until at least what we have today, until about 500 years after.
Oh, that's interesting, because I know they started it during the Babylonian captivity, but okay. So it wasn't a full thing at the time.
Yeah. The Talmud's more like a giant, it's like Wikipedia. It's like it's constantly can be added to. It's not like the Bible where there's a set canon, really.
Okay.
So, but yeah, that's a good point. And then the Essenes, which they're not really significant. They're more like a reaction to these other 2 groups. So so after Christ came, what's Jesus doing throughout the Bible or throughout the Gospels? He's performing miracles. He's fulfilling a lot of ancient prophecies. He's humble. He's putting himself at the lowest possible place you could imagine someone to put themselves. And then, he's very kind to everyone he runs across, except for the Pharisees and at times the Sadducees. He has no problem, at least that we can see, with the Romans or Greeks, because Galilee was a predominantly Greek area. So we have places in the Bible where Jesus, it's called the 8 woes of the Pharisees. And basically it's in Matthew chapter 23 and Luke chapter 20. And he's basically calling out the Pharisees for everything that they've been doing. For instance, let's see here. Like teaching about God, not loving God, or like not allowing people to work on the Sabbath. And Jesus actually asks, so if someone like is injured, or if you see someone who needs help, are you not allowed to help them on the Sabbath? Stuff like that. And the Pharisees are basically like, no, they should be stoned to death because that's considered work. They take the law so seriously that there's no room at all for mercy or love or everything that Jesus came and taught. So, in case you don't know, Jesus gets crucified, which, under the Romans was the most brutal and humiliating way to go. But Pilate, the Roman governor, he's not on board with it. I mean, ultimately, he kind of gives in. But he tries to, he at least makes a little bit of an effort to, he sends him to Herod, who's the local king. Herod sends him back, and they're not able to find anything wrong with him, because the only problem that Jesus has is anti-Semitism, right? Because he's coming in and, according to the Pharisees, blaspheming, calling himself God, which, I mean, if you're a Christian, he is. But yeah, like the whole thing is just, if he didn't oppose the Pharisees, if he went along with that, he would have been fine. Or I mean, he wouldn't have struck their disdain for him, So Jesus makes a prophecy in Matthew 24. I'm gonna pull it up real quick. Yeah, Matthew 24. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came for him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And by what sign of thy coming, or what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Skipping down a little to verse 11, and many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for the witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come. One more verse 15 here. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place. Now, this abomination of desolation is referring to a specific type of event, and that's where the temple gets either destroyed or blasphemed, so that it basically, like, some other country comes in and installs their own god there, or they destroy it. So this happened in Babylon, or when the Babylonians came in the 500s BC. It happened when during the Maccabees revolt, or it's actually the reason why they revolted mostly. It was because Antiochus, the Seleucid king, came in and tried to force all the Jews living there to worship Zeus, and tried to put Zeus in the temple. And that is kind of what set off that whole rebellion. And then the third big one, and the most important, was the destruction of the temple by Emperor Titus in 70 AD. Now, that point is the last time that the Jews had any kind of temple, and basically Judaism ceased to be a legitimate, like they didn't have a place to worship anymore,
or
really.
to sacrifice.
Yeah, or to sacrifice. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Thanks. So Christ comes, and he also, like, you know about how when he cleanses the temple. I'm going to read this from John. It's in all the Gospels, but it's in not most of it. It's right before like Holy Week, when Jesus rides into Jerusalem, and then gets betrayed, Last Supper, all that stuff. So And the Jews' Passover, this is John 2, starting with verse 13. And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple that sold those that sold oxen, sheep, and doves, and the changers of money sitting. And when he made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, the sheep, the oxen, and poured the changers' money and overthrew the tables. And said unto them that sold doves, take these things hence, make not my father's house a house of merchandise. So what do we see here? We see two things at once that Jesus is going, and it's the only time that's recorded in scripture where Jesus Christ uses physical force in order to get people to stop doing something. And what are those two things that they're doing?
Well, they're selling in the church, right?
Basically, it's usury, because at that time, for some historical context, people were. It's kind of like going to a movie theater. You know how you can only bring in movie theater food into a movie theater. It's kind of like that. You can't bring your own animal to sacrifice.
Oh, I see.
You can't. You can only buy the stuff on the temple grounds.
Awesome.
Otherwise, it's not considered pure and holy. And so they're able to charge these exorbitant amounts of money to do it. And some people wouldn't be able to sacrifice if they can't afford it. So that's the big thing right there. And also the fact that it's in, as Christ says, his father's house, the temple, it's holy. So it's those two things right there. So symbolically, when he's cleansing the temple, that's basically the same thing that all these people, like these National Socialist leaders, do when they essentially cleanse their country of the money changers and usurers and everything. So what is there that's not anti-Semitic about that?
Yeah, I thought you were going to do it from like a more of a race aspect, the racial version of it. And I was going to do those verses in Matthew 16 where Jesus says, I don't give my food to dogs. You remember when the Canaanite woman comes out? But if you think about your argument, like being against their religion, he literally destroyed Judaism. Because because when he died, remember the thing in the holiest holies was rent.
Yeah.
Remember, it broke. And then history has it that between then and 70 AD, every year they didn't get the sign for the sacrifice. So they literally never sacrificed again until 70 AD. The temple was destroyed. Now they can't sacrifice anymore. And literally everybody who held on to Judaism from the time Jesus died has gone to hell by their own religion, because they can't sacrifice. They can't fulfill the thing to get the forgiveness they need, right?
Exactly. And also, I was going to get into like another thing is like people say like, oh, you're anti-Semitic. Well, if it, or you hate Jews or whatever. I mean, who were all the first Christians? They were all Jews for the most part. I mean, with the exception of like Nicodemus and that centurion, but yeah. And then look at Paul. Paul was a Pharisee. He was or Saul of Tarsus. He was a Pharisee. He was essentially the predecessor, like at that time, a Talmudic rabbinical Jew, essentially. And he became the strongest early Christian missionary after that conversion because he was more, I would say, misguided. He thought he was doing one thing, but he was redirected. And then I was also going to bring up the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because that's after the temple was destroyed. The diaspora, and that's where all these Jews, the Pharisees in particular, went all throughout the world. A lot of people, and this is why I brought up that verse in Matthew where he's talking about there'll be false prophets. They'll say the end is going to come. I mean, what do you think, like Cyrus Schofield and all these people saying that, oh, now that Israel's over there, like Jonathan Cahn and everyone, now that we have Israel back on the earth, they can take these Old Testament prophecies or even New Testament and insert their own interpretation in there and say, hey, God has a separate plan for the Jews still. And so we as Christians, it's our duty to do everything we can for them. And so I think that lines up a lot too with scripture. And then also so getting to the Talmud, after the Jews were like scattered, a lot of them went to the Sassanid Empire in Persia, because the Romans, they became Christian officially in 325, 331, one of those dates, like the early 300s. A lot of the Jews, they didn't want them there, but they were allowed in Persia, among other places, under the Sassanid Empire. And that is roughly when the Talmud started to become more or less finalized, the Babylonian Talmud. And yeah, there's a lot more I could get into there, but basically the Pharisees are, this isn't conspiracy, this is on there, like the people Christ was talking to and like rebuking constantly throughout his ministry are the same people that today are or at least not necessarily the same people, but they follow the same doctrines of the people in the today.
Yeah. I did an episode a really, really long time ago. I don't know, like it was when I first started the channel, and it was called like Adolf Hitler, the most racist person in history, ? Like that, you know? I don't know if you've seen that one, but
I have.
Okay, yeah. And I was talking about how Hitler was a religionist. He hated the Jewish religion. So he was anti-Semitic, but he didn't hate Jewish Christians, Jewish ethnic who were Christians, and he had them as his field generals, his field marshals, his own doctor, you know what I mean? Hundreds of thousands in his military. And so if you look at it, it's funny because you could basically say that the two most anti-Judaism people on the planet ever existed were Jesus Christ and Adolf Hitler. Pretty seriously, you could say that. It's honestly true. They are the two most people who did the most to try to stop Judaism, you know?
And also, I mean, there's a ton, like it used to be the norm back in the Middle Ages and everything, because people could see up front what was going on, like that. Like it was no secret until relatively recently when they started like covering it up, and I don't know, or I do know,
or you just can't talk about it because the Holocaust was a real thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the big H.
Yeah, the other big H. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed. You know what I mean? You're not supposed to talk about it anymore because of that, and then that's all nonsense, of course. But
well, that's the thing too. Like in that documentary, it said that there's two things of like the gospel of modern America that you can't ever question: the Holocaust and the towers.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Great documentary. Stu Peters. It was phenomenal. Where do you watch Stu Peters at on a regular basis? Like what platform?
Rumble.
Oh, on Rumble. So it's just a Stu Peters Network channel?
Yep.
Okay, I looked it up and there were a couple of them and I wasn't sure which one was legit. So it's obviously the one with the most subscribers, obviously.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it looks all professional and everything, just Stu Peters Network.
Okay, gotcha.
So.
Okay, I think you made your point. I think it was a great point. I hadn't thought about it like that before. You want to add anything else?
I hadn't a ton, but that other podcast I listened to, it's called The Whole Counsel of God. It's really good. This guy, he's an Orthodox priest, and he goes through the whole Bible verse by verse. But he says, and he's not the only one that says this, is fairly common knowledge that you're not allowed to say in a lot of evangelical churches, but it's there were two factions of Jews that survived the destruction of the temple: the Pharisees and the Christians. Because Christianity at that time was considered just a sect of Judaism up until later. So,
right. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, that's all from me. Unless you've got any other questions.
No, I think it was great.
Sweet.
Okay, well that's what we got for you guys. Thanks for coming on, Karen, and hope you guys have a great weekend.